Welcome, Brandon. Welcome to the Go Hard
Hello.
Chick podcast. How are you?
Thank Great. Thanks for having me on.
I am thrilled about this conversation. I think when we initially spoke, I think I shared that this was like one of the topics in my mind that I wanted to
Yes.
address because it's so important. So I'm thrilled to have you on today to talk about mold.
It's one of those subjects that it can be fascinating. I didn't think that it would be, when I first got into it, but absolutely the more I've dived in, the more that I found that it is something that is pretty intriguing and fascinating. There's a lot of, information out there, misinformation, good information, so it's important to kind of get the true information at the end of
Yeah,
the
and
day.
I don't think it's something, even though it should be, that's on a lot of folks' radars as potential issues uh, within their home, within their work environment. So I'm really thrilled to have you on.
Excellent. Yeah, the subject of water damaged buildings and uh, sort of the sickness that can go along with it. I think it over the last few years and really probably the last 10 years has become more and more awareness on it, and some of that is pop culture. I don't know if you saw the Netflix series, The Last of Us. It
Yes.
talks about like fungus growing inside of us and the whole concept of mold and its toxins. And then there's other shows that it's been on. Everybody's heard of black mold, right? And that it can obviously be pretty terrifying, that concept. But it's not just black mold. There's white mold. There's brown mold. There's green mold. There's orange mold. There's and some people are like, oh, pink mold, but actually pink mold tends to be bacterial.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So there's one of these things that once you delve in, it can add a lot of clarity and shed some light on something that can be scary, or it can also be one of those things that people think it's a scam and that it's really not something to be concerned about. And I think that
Okay.
it's pretty much you want to be in the middle on it because
Okay.
it is something that you should be aware of. It does cause issues, but you don't need to live in fear about it. There's definitely solutions to it.
Okay. That's good to hear. So, without further ado, please just introduce yourself to the listeners, share with them whatever you want them to know about you and your background.
Sure. So, originally I wasn't involved in mold, although my dad did have a construction company, and we were partnered with an inspection company when I was a teenager. It was short lived. I didn't stay on the West Coast for long, and I basically when I was doing that particular type of work, I wasn't involved in that for very long. So I got into mold when we moved to Tampa, and a buddy of mine basically approached me on getting involved with his mold company. Initially, I said I'm not interested because I felt it was a step down, and I had been doing a lot of like marketing and sales, and I worked for mainly like white collar type work, and the concept of being a mold guy was not necessarily something that I kind of dreamt of all my life. So
I get
then,
it.
yeah, yeah. So and I also had, believe it or not, I was on the other extreme, in terms of kind of down and dirty, where I was also doing a lot of photography as well, and kind of doing a lot of portraits and so there's this beautiful aspect of life, and then there's this really nasty aspect of life, which I was like, I don't think I want to go there. But he said, look, there's equity involved if you come on board, and my wife was pregnant at the time, so it was our first child, and I thought, well, I should probably plan for the future. Maybe I should do this. I think that the financial demands are going to be higher than what a photographer, but honestly, I was also doing sales too, sales and marketing. So I probably could have gotten by. But I really liked the idea of a company that was going to be my own, that I would have ownership in. So I said, let's do it. And then I started the certification and the training and started learning all of this stuff about mold. And I was like, okay, this is pretty fascinating. The impact because I really enjoy helping people and making a difference. And there was an aspect of helping people with their indoor air quality that I did like, that seemed appealing. So a month after my son was born, he actually started waking up really congested, almost like he was having an asthma attack. And my wife wanted to take him to the emergency room. And I said, look, it could be environmental. Let me just take a look around. And I started, checking things out, moving things. And sure enough, we moved this one shelving system, and there was, 4 square feet of mold in the back of this shelving system. And it was in the same room that the air handler was located. So it was taking that moldy, contaminated air and then blowing it throughout the rest of the house.
Mm.
And we ended up fixing the leak, removing the contaminated material, and then we sanitized the entire home, doing the atomized sanitization process that we specialize in. And the next day, he slept an hour longer and he had no trouble breathing. And that was my first sort of really big moment where I was like, oh, wow. Because I thought about what would have happened had we not known to look for an environmental trigger. And the doctors wouldn't have known. They wouldn't have known what was going on in the house. They wouldn't have known what was bringing this about, and the amount of testing and blood draw, and who knows what would have occurred. And I felt like it probably would have been fairly traumatizing for him. So when I thought about that, I got a lot more thorough in my initial walkthroughs that I was doing in people's homes, and looking and really trying to find the actual source and the culprit behind their air quality issues.
Wow.
So,
So,
and
look, I'm sorry, I
yeah, go
didn't mean
ahead.
to interrupt.
No, go
Now,
ahead.
your son started having the problems with congestion, but had your wife or yourself, had you all experienced anything?
Not at that time, no. And that's
Okay.
the thing that's a little bit mysterious about it, is it, mold's going to impact us differently, right? Everybody's immune system is different. Just like some people might be allergic to penicillin, right? The antibiotic, right? For some people, it might save their life. And for others, it could be really catastrophic if they were to take it. So people always ask, are you allergic to any sort of medication or antibiotics? Well, it's a similar type of thing where, and especially when you have a young immune system or somebody who might be immune compromised, or the elderly, they might have a more severe reaction where somebody else can be in there and their body is going to produce antibodies and kind of fend it off where they might not be able to. And believe it or not, there's a certain percentage of the population, about 25% of them, they have a particular genetic deficiency where they do not detox the same level. It takes a lot longer for their body to detox. So when you get into that and you look at the actual, it could impact one side of the family and then the other just not getting impacted at all. So 1 in 4, 1 in 5 could be really suffering, and everybody else is okay. So at that point in time, everybody else was fine. But in 2019, I got sick from mold, and my wife and kids were totally okay. And it was just me. But there's another factor where I was also going into moldy homes, every day. And, I was starting to feel fatigued, and I was getting fevers, and I had this pain in my chest that was like undeniable. It was not going away. And I was sick, and I was trying to figure it out. It was costing me time from work. It was costing me my ability to concentrate. And I ended up taking a test, which was called a mycotoxin test from, at the time it was Great Plains Laboratory, but now it's the company's Mosaic Diagnostics. And mycotoxin, myco is the Greek word for fungus. And, obviously a toxin, something poisonous. So the fungus poison is tested by a urine sample. And I did this sample, sent it in, and it basically, I came back super high on 5 different mycotoxins. And one of them was not just high, it was like off the charts. Like high was 5 to 50, and I was at 1,215. So I
Mm.
was like super toxic. And I chalked it up to going into other people's homes. And then 6 months later, my air conditioning overflowed, and I was removing the continuous flooring. We had a luxury vinyl plank, and it was continuous. So I was getting rid of all of it, and then I popped the baseboard in my master bedroom, and there was a toxic mold called Chaetomium behind the baseboard. And then I decided to, remove the material, because with that particular type of mold, that's what you're supposed to do. And as I go 2 feet up, well, on the backside, there's 2 feet high of another mold called Aspergillus penicillium. So I had to go 4 feet up, because you want to go basically a foot to 2 feet past any visible mold. So it was in basically 3/4 of my master bedroom. And the thing that was ironic is I had even done an air sample in my master bedroom, and I had popped a baseboard on the other side of the room, and the air sample came back clean. The baseboard was clean. There was no visible signs. There was no smell, but there it was, like lurking behind my walls and releasing the gas that was poisoning me. And within 3 weeks of finding it, removing it, cleaning it up, sanitizing the whole house, all my symptoms went away.
Wow. Um, so this is scary because,
It's pretty
I
intense,
think,
right?
yeah, a lot of people think they're going to see it or they're going to smell it. Um, well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How big of a problem is mold in homes and environments? Like, are there any percentages studies, like how many homes or businesses
Yeah, it's
or
about
buildings maybe?
50%.
Okay.
It's about 50% right now. And I think that depending on where you're located, it's going to be higher, right? Because
Mhm.
if you're in an area that is arid or more dry, your chances of there being a situation are lower, because the environment will pull water out of the materials faster,
Mhm.
right? Because and there's science at play in regards to the speed of dry out that takes place based on the climate and based on the temperature and the amount of water droplets in the air compared to the amount of moisture in the contents. But if you're in a humid climate like we are here in Tampa Bay, where we're literally a peninsula on a peninsula, we're surrounded by water, and we have these torrential rains that take place. The humidity is like 70% on average year round. It's hard to dry out a structure. So the longer it stays wet, the higher the chance of there being mold, because it's never going to fully dry out. So, and that's the same for like Houston, down in Louisiana, these places
Mhm.
that are on the Gulf, that are close to the water, where it tends to be pretty humid. Obviously, if you have listeners that are in the tropics, the difference is that here in the States, we have certain rules and regulations now in terms of, energy efficiency. So the building envelopes are tighter, and, the material that we're building with, it, it's cheaper than it used to be. We're using like drywall instead of plaster now, and there's things like that. Not to mention, there is other factors that could actually speed up the growth of mold, in terms of technology that exists today. And what I mean by that is there was a study done by a scientist where, due to the electromagnetic frequencies and the wavelengths, it tends to agitate mold. And when mold is agitated, or it's attacked, or it feels threatened, it grows faster and it puts out more of the toxic substance, about 600 times faster. So when you get into what's in our homes in terms of Wi-Fi, electronics, and things like that, it also might be leading to the rapid growth of mold, or it being more toxic. So
Wow.
so there is that factor. But then when you get into the energy efficiency, which is definitely a real thing, no question about it, the building envelope tends to be tighter. So it's kind of similar to if there is colonized mold in your home. And that's when most people think mold, they think colonized mold. It's what they can see, it's visual, it's growing. Well, if you have that, and maybe if it's hidden, but it's in a tight building envelope, it's very similar to a car, not an electric car, but obviously a gas powered vehicle. It's going to release carbon monoxide. That's just part of what it does, right? So now you say take that same car and you put it in a garage and you close it up. And if there's people or plants or pets in that garage, it's not good for them because they're breathing in all this carbon monoxide. And in actual fact, it can be very poisonous for them. So it's similar where if you do have colonized mold in your home and it's a large enough quantity, it can release a toxic substance that is poisonous, and it's in a building envelope where it's just recirculate. It's just recycling, So yes, in my case, it was these two different molds battling it out, and molds get territorial, believe it or not. So it feels another mold encroaching on its territory, and it will start producing more of the mycotoxin. So I thought I was in a safe zone, and in actual fact, I was in a biological warfare zone, right? And that's kind of the thing that, you go, well, how do we know? Right, to your point, can't see it, can't smell it. How do we know? How many buildings have it? Well, there's quite a few, because if there's been, past water intrusion issues, if there's been floods, if there's been, toilet overflows, if the humidity's been too high, if the AC's gone out, all of these things can lead to mold. So the most important test really is the people test. Or is a person, or are there people or one person in that home or in that building that is feeling like intoxicated or feeling sick or having sort of these mysterious symptoms like headaches, joint aches, respiratory issues, rashes, chronic cough. These are the types of things that people talk about, fatigue. Or how about if they go into the home, brain fog, that's another one. Even sometimes depression. There's things like that where they don't understand why in that particular space they feel sick. But then if they go on vacation and they're in a different environment, all of a sudden a lot of those symptoms go away. So it's really important to kind of be in tune to how you're feeling, and also know the history of that home. Know the history of, have there been, past water intrusion events? Have there been, are you seeing little signs, maybe like mildew, where for a lot of people, they think, oh, mildew, it's not that big a deal. But mildew is a euphemism for mold in many cases, right? Oh, it's just a little bit of mildew. But let's say you have luggage or shoes or a purse and it's starting to grow stuff on it. Well, that's a sure sign that the airborne levels are probably high versus right? It's it's one of those types of things where
I did
if
not
you're
know
seeing,
that.
yeah.
Hmm. So do you recommend, I know you mentioned if someone is sick or not feeling well, would you recommend, even if you're not feeling well, to periodically have your home tested?
So testing is an interesting subject because it can be expensive, right?
Yeah.
And especially you're calling somebody out who's a specialist. They're running samples. The samples get submitted to the lab. The lab has to develop them. But there are more economical ways of doing it, right? Like there's a company called Immunolytics that does Petri dishes, and that's going to be a more economical route. There's also real-time labs. They do environmental and they also do physical, where you can do like a dust test. It's called an ERMI test, which is Environmental Relative Moldiness Index, I believe is what it stands for. And, you can take that and take some of the dust from the house and it can tell you if those levels are elevated. And then they kind of, a lot of it is going to be like reading Greek when you first look at it, and you're going to kind of be like, what am I looking at here? So you might want to, hire somebody to be a consultant, but that's probably going to be cheaper than, somebody coming out and taking a bunch of samples. There's also, which I like to refer to it, the cutest way of doing mold testing, which is a mold sniffing dog, and they can come out and, similar to like, they can obviously test for drugs or sniff for drugs, bombs, hard drives, whatever. Well, they get trained to sniff and smell for mold. Where for us, we're not that sensitive, but they tend to be more accurate. And then they're about 90% accurate, where the air samples are probably about 30% accurate, which is kind of scary because the air samples are usually testing, a certain space for a certain amount of time. So you may or may not have stuff floating around at that point in time. It may or may not be spore laden. It could be a heavy spore, so it immediately is going to the ground, depending on the type of mold. So now that's not to say that you shouldn't do air samples, because that is data. And if it comes back hot, then you definitely know you have an issue if it's elevated. But then you also really need to find somebody who's a straight shooter who's going to decipher it for you. And I really recommend having somebody who is doing the testing be different than the person who's doing the remediation project. And the reason I say that, I just had a friend of mine contact me who knew that I was a specialist in this particular subject. So she reached out to me from Orange County in California, and she got this whole report and protocol that was basically recommending that the bathroom get removed, the kitchen get removed, because there was sampling that came back that showed that there was certain species of mold in her home. So I was expecting to see these numbers that were severely elevated. But then when I looked at the report, I was like, these are great numbers. This is not something that you should be removing your bathroom or your kitchen for. So you got to watch for people that are going to basically take advantage of the lack of knowledge or awareness that is out there, because there are certain molds that are more toxic than others, and there are certain molds that are indicative of water damage and others that are naturally occurring in the environment. And there's a bunch of different factors at play. So for example, if I get a test that comes back with 5 spores of Stachybotrys charum, which is the toxic black mold, well, that's a red flag. Whereas if I get a report that comes back with 500 cladosporium, I might raise an eyebrow. I might be like, okay, that's a little bit more than what should be there. Cladosporium is kind of naturally occurring. It can come in. It's not as toxic, although there's a toxic aspect to it, or same thing with Aspergillus penicillium. If it's at 200, is that concerning or not? Well, most people have no idea. To me, I look at that and I go, that's a great level for that particular type of spore. Now, what if it's at 5,000 on that particular spore inside and it's 10,000 outside? Well, some people will go, well, look, there's more outside than there is inside. But I go, 5,000 on PNAS, that can cause headaches, joint aches, respiratory issues. That's something that should be handled. We should definitely treat that, or we should address that. So it's a matter of having somebody who's knowledgeable kind of translate those results and be able to give you direction based on that, based on kind of what type, how much compared to outside, what are the different factors. So that's why having somebody who is independent and not going to benefit from doing the job, be the one to do the testing, and the person who's doing the job simply based on, they have judgment once they're there. And once they're seeing stuff, then yes, they should make sure that they take care of it. But realistically, you just got to make sure, just like anything else, that you're dealing with people with a moral compass who really do have your best interest at heart and are not trying to take advantage of a situation where there may be a lack of knowledge.
So let me ask you, I have so many questions. Your
Okay.
friend that's in, I think you said LA.
Right.
When you saw these numbers and you said that they weren't too high, what does that mean for her? That she doesn't need a complete tear down of her kitchen, for example?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Wow.
not. So, she does not need to do that. if she wanted to play it on the safe side, she could get like a whole home sanitization. And, there's companies out there that do that, that are, they go in and they basically do a full dry fog of the home. They run it through the ducts, and it's a non-toxic product. And that's the Pure Maintenance Network. They do that. So they do like a demolition-free mold remediation. So that would be playing it kind of on the safe side. Now, with that said, um, I there's a lot of that technology that I like and I respect, and I think it's fantastic, but it's also one slice of the pie. So I would never take, for example, I was in a home yesterday where the lady had a slow leak, and she pulled out her dishwasher and it's covered in black mold, and goes behind her cabinets. Now, would I come in and just do a dry fog in that scenario? Absolutely not. Right?
Right.
Like, all of that material is coming out. That's contaminated material. And, you know, you also, am I going to fog the place afterwards? Yes, of course, at the tail end, after I've built containment, I've done the, air control, there's negative air, the bad air is getting blown out of the house, filtration for bringing in good air. We're going to have precision demolition. We're going to remove all of that stuff, properly bag it up, get it out of the house, do a full micro cleaning on the space, like with a special vacuum that removes very tiny particles. Do like a wipe down with a microfiber rag, and then we're going to end up cleaning the ducts and then sanitizing the house. Why? Well, she's got 3 kids. It's a toxic mold. It's been there for a long time. Mold is not just the spores, it's the gas that it releases. The air samples don't even show the gas. The air samples are just showing the spores. It's a spore trap. So but you just need to extrapolate, like, if it's that amount of mold, there's zero question that it's going to release a toxic substance. So it's almost like a chemical cleanup at that point in time. So no,
Okay.
the fogging would not be sufficient. But, in a case where there's a small amount of spores and they're wanting to play it on the safe side, then yes, they could get somebody to come in and do, whole home sanitization,
Okay.
doing like a
Now,
dry
you
fog.
you mentioned like some of the symptoms that folks may experience. I think you said brain fog, headaches, and the like. What other things or what signs could there be of mold? Maybe not physical symptoms that someone in the home might be suffering from, but something else that might tip you off that you may have a mold problem.
I mean, look, there was a article in Psychology Today, from 2017, where the lady was, a psychiatrist that was taking a bit more of a holistic approach to a lot of these symptoms. And she's talking about many of the psychiatric labels could very easily be environmental triggers,
Mm.
because part of what happens is the mycotoxins tend to be fatty in substance. So they have a natural affinity to the most fatty part of the body, which is the brain. And it actually can interrupt the neurological transmission, and it can create a host of mental disorders along with physical disorders. So, and these ultrafine particles can get into your lungs, it can get into the bloodstream. And clearly, I'm a mold guy. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not trying. So, any of this stuff is just based off of my experience and conversations and my own studies. But, it's definitely worth looking at in terms of the amount of physical and mental impact, like the non-optimum physical situations that can arise or mental situations that can arise. A lot of it could trace back to an environmental trigger,
Mm.
and yeah,
What about like odors?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's a host of, look, when you go, this might translate a little bit better, right? How about fungal infections? How many people have heard of, fungal infections of the sinuses, athlete's foot,
Hmm.
ringworm, right? Things like that. Well, what's that coming from? That's mold, right? That's a fungus. A mushroom is fungus, but then you have colonized mold. Those two things are different, but they're part of the same kingdom. It is the fungal kingdom. And the way that fungus replicates is through the release of spores. So the spores are not alive or dead. They are little seeds, similar to like going to the store and buying, apple seeds and planting them. The seeds are not alive or dead. They have the potential to be alive. So if you inhale these spores, right, what do the seeds need to grow? Well, they need water, oxygen, and nutrients. Well, what does the body provide? Water, oxygen, and nutrients, organic nutrients. So you literally can get mold starting to grow in your body. And that, like there's a particular medical condition called aspergillosis, where aspergillus is starting to grow in your body. And that's one of those things that if you have elevated levels, of aspergillus in your home, then you're increasing the chances of some of that taking hold and impacting your actual physical body from the inside out. So what are the different side effects or possibilities? I mean, there's a lot. The main thing is, there's not really any mold that's a good mold to have in your home. If your home is wet, the chances of mold developing are high. If your humidity levels are over 60%, there's a good chance that mold will develop, especially if you're not drying it out. That's why you want to dry things out. And it's not just dry to the touch, or dry to the eye. It's like using moisture meters to determine, is this actually dry? We've seen it where homes have had, like, concrete slabs, and then they don't do a proper vapor barrier, and then they put wood down, and then they might even put like a LVP over wood, and it creates like a moldy sandwich because it's no longer being able to breathe, and it traps the moisture, and then you get mold underneath the flooring. We've seen it where it's concrete slab, a poor vapor barrier, and then like a laminate, and then it gets wet under the laminate, and mold loves organic cheap material, and you get a ton of mold under the flooring. So there's a lot of different possibilities in terms of the way that mold can develop. But at the simplest stage, if you want to keep your home mold free, you want your home as clean and dry as possible.
Okay. Okay. Now, just so I'm clear and the listeners are clear, if someone thinks they have a mold issue, what types of methods of detection should they be looking for? Like, are there better? Are there worse? Like you mentioned, air tests might not be that great. What should they look for?
So it really does depend on, of course, and budget dictates a lot, right?
Right.
So, and there's also the level of potential pain, if you will. So, is this
Meaning symptoms and that kind
is
of
it
pain.
is it debilitating, right?
Right.
Are you not able to function? Is it life or death? Are you immune compromised? Is it you have to find, you've gone to a, let's say, functional medicine doctor or integrative medicine doctor, and they've done physical testing and they've told you, look, you have mold. It's either in your home or your work. Well, I work from home. Well, then it's definitely in your home, right? It's in your body. So you need to find it. And how, are you spending a huge amount of money on this medical handling? And the medical handling is going to go nowhere if you're going back to an environmentally toxic home. So at that point in time, you do not want to just rely on some petri dishes that you get from immunolytics. So then you have to look, there's low tier, mid tier, top tier. There are certain inspection companies that are charging pretty large amounts of money because they're doing a very thorough series of tests, right? They're doing air samples, they're doing direct samples, they're doing bacterial samples, they're doing VOC sampling, they're doing an ERMI sample, like the environmental relative moldiness index test. This is a super sensitive test. So they may have 7 or 8 different types of tests that they're doing to really develop an indoor air quality profile on your home. They're going into your attic, they're going into your crawl space, they're doing cavity samples. There's no stone left unturned. They're really doing a deep dive. It might be 2 people in your home for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. That's going to be a very pricey inspection. Okay. Then you might have mid-tier, which is usually acceptable for most, where it's somebody who's has experience, they know what to look for, they have flashlights, they have potentially a borescope, they're looking into your ducts, they're looking into the AC unit, they're looking into cavities, like with the borescope. They're going into the crawl space, they're poking their head in their attic, but you're looking at maybe 2 hours versus 2 people for 6 to 8 hours. They're doing air samples, they're doing direct samples on anything that may be suspicious, and then they're sending it to a lab, and then they're writing a report and what's called a protocol, which is the step-by-step handling to make that home safe and healthy again. So that's gonna, that could range anywhere from 500 to 800, for an inspection like that. Then there's the low tier, which is really kind of like a home inspector that sort of tacks on a couple mold samples, part of their service. Or you might have an inspector that really doesn't know what they're doing, and they're just going in there and kind of putting a couple pumps in different rooms and saying, yeah, you're good, which unfortunately
Mm-hmm.
leads to a false peace of mind if they come back saying, oh, yeah, you're good. When they didn't really look. They did not put on their detective hat. And that's, to me, I think the most crucial element of all is knowing where to look and having the tools to look in the right places. And they should be looking at any place where there is moisture.
Okay. Now, what do you any? Just has me thinking. Do you have any tips if someone suspects that the issue is their place of employment? I mean, I can imagine some folks are not. You tell that to your boss, they're not going to want to pay to have the building inspected for mold.
Yeah,
Any
that's a
tips
tough
on how to
one.
deal with that? Yeah.
That is a tough one. The first thing is just kind of knowing that looking, because a lot of times you can look and you can see, look, there's dark spots on the vents. That's not good. That type of mold is usually cladosporium, and it is a mold that does produce a mycotoxin that can lead to headaches, respiratory issues, and skin rashes, and all kinds of stuff, right? It's also, how about if there's been a moisture or water intrusion issue and there's stuff growing on the wall, right? Not good. And then it's not just that there might be a situation, it's also how do they handle it? Because the thing that we really haven't even touched upon is remediation can be done, right? And let's say it's a general contractor that goes in there that doesn't really know mold, they don't respect mold, they don't think it's an issue, and they just go and tear out the material. Well, what
Mm-hmm.
they've also just done is turned it into a mold explosion, and they've agitated it, and now the spores are everywhere, and the mycotoxins could also be now airborne and in the environment. And every building is going to have different, currents, air currents, in terms of like pulls and pushes and pressure. So that can then float around, and then you can be exposed to it, and it can actually make the situation worse. So in a lot of cases, when you're dealing with, a landlord situation or property management or a boss, they may not want to bring a lot of attention to it, and they may not necessarily handle it the right way. So it really is a matter of having the discussion and bringing up their awareness in regards to how important it is to have exceptional or even acceptable air quality, right? And, there's, I think, a factor where realistically, if you have any landlords or property owners listening, I will speak to them And I will say that there is a liability factor that you need to be aware of, that if you do not do it the right way, that can result in a much more pricey bill down the road if somebody decides to take action and get, lawyers involved because their safety and their health is at risk. So the best thing to do is handle it properly and actually understand that there is a liability factor that is far worse than paying for doing it the right way.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good tip. That's a great tip. Now, you touched on it, remediation, and not like obviously don't get your cousin down the street who might be a contractor. What should we be looking for? We've discovered mold in the house, or how do we? What kind of company should we be looking for? How do we know they're doing it right? Any tips on that?
Well, of course, first and foremost, the good news is that we all have the ability to do a little research these
Hmm.
days, right? And reviews and reputation and references are all crucial and something to look at. But, we all had to start at some point in time, right? And how about somebody who's just starting out? Well, then you need to make sure that they're knowledgeable and that they know their stuff. Are they licensed? Some states require a license, some don't, but minimally, are they certified? What certification have they done? Is this like a 2-hour class online? Or did they go for 3 to 5 days, learning about this stuff? Do they have the proper tools? You know, um, and even 3 to 5 days is not a lot of time. You really should have more experience, and in the state of Florida, you have to have at least 4 years of experience to get a license, unless you went to university for, biology or microbiology and have a degree. Then you just need 1 year of experience. But you have to, minimally, you should know the tools. You should have the tools of the trade. You should have containment, you should have air scrubbers, you should have dehumidifiers, you should have meters, you should be able to check for relative humidity, you should be able to check for moisture. These are the things that you should be looking at. And there's other filtration devices that you could have as part of your arsenal. Do they understand what a mycotoxin is? Is there a health centric aspect to their approach? Are they using products that tend to be poisonous? Are they using products that are green or eco-friendly or non-toxic? These are the types of things that I would be asking if somebody was coming into my home and talking about doing any sort of remediation. But I think that if you're starting to kind of get the sense that they don't know what they're talking about, then they probably don't. And,
Hmm.
you might want to find somebody else that does. Now, the other aspect of it is they may talk a good game, but then they're not delivering and that's where I would say, hey, we're going to put this on pause. If you see that they're not putting up proper containment, if they are not putting down like floor protection, they're not respecting your home, they're not really looking at those things, then there might be a time to pause that project.
Yeah.
You know.
Now you mentioned, I think a lot of people are scared of the cost.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm being frank, what, and I know you're in Florida, but just so folks have an idea.
Look, the cost is a thing. It's not cheap to do it right. When you kind
Hmm.
of go into all the expenses that go along with it, of course you can get like, a dad and his son, they are been doing it for a long time, and they might have a better price than, let's say a larger operation. But you also have to, I don't know if you've ever seen those kind of like diagrams where it's like speed, price, quality, and it's like
Hmm.
pick two because you're not getting three, right? It's if you want it done fast and you want it to be a good quality, you're going to need to pay a better price, right? A higher price. So it's kind of similar where the dad and his son may not be that responsive. They may kind of have a waiting list of 4 weeks because their price is better, but they're not able to get to all the jobs. So they might have a waiting list. And mold is not one of those things where you really want to be on a waiting list. You want to, once you know there's a situation, you want to handle it sooner than later. So, but if you kind of go into like, well, what goes into a project? Well, there's equipment, there's maintenance of the equipment, there's the licensing, there's the classes that you have to take, there's the insurance, there's the workers' comp, the general liability. There's all of these things that go into if you're doing it right. And if they're not willing to play by the rules on that stuff, why would they play by the rules on the other stuff? So usually if they're a good business and they're doing things per the book, by the book, then they're going to have more expenses. So a remediation project could be anywhere from $3,000 to $30,000, depending on the size of it. You know, there's been projects that have been massive projects where the entire home, imagine if you get a home that's infested, that's sat, and it's fully contaminated, and it was wet, and it sat for 6 months, and mold is literally on every wall, on every ceiling, on every item. So what would you pay for a full demo project on a home? What would be the price tag for just demolition? You're not talking about equipment. You're not talking about people that are, you know, it's in a hazardous industry. So the price tag can be pretty high, you know, once you look at it from that perspective. So I guess it really kind of just depends on the scope of, and what I would recommend usually is look, get 3 quotes, and you may not want to go with the lowest, right? But get 3 quotes to make sure that you're not getting gouged. And also, let's say you have somebody that's better, more knowledgeable, you get a better vibe, they seem more trustworthy, right? But their price is higher. You could always say, look, you know, I got 3 quotes. I wanted to use your company. I want to use your company, but you're literally coming in 20% higher than the other guys. Is there something that you can do for me on this? And they might be able to think with that, or they may say, look, my prices are my price. But at the end of the day, you know, there's that saying, buy once, cry once, right? Like, you know, like when I was doing photography, a lot of times I would look for different lenses. And because I was on a budget, I might buy the cheaper lens. And then I look at the quality of photograph and I see the distortions and I see that it's not sharp. And I'm like, I can't do anything with this. So now I go and buy the lens that I knew I should have bought in the first place. That was more expensive, but it was the right lens. And now all my shots are crystal clear. So now I had to pay for it twice. Where if I would have just done it with the person that really knew how to do it in the first place, you wouldn't have to get it redone.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I wish I had spoken to you sooner, Brandon, because we had a mold issue in my home. And I was having symptoms. I have an autoimmune disease, and I noticed a flare up, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But I had a lot of congestion, constant, could not get rid of it. It would leave me alone for a day or two and come right back. And it just so happened my home office is in our basement. It was raining really hard one day. I happened to go to the other side of the basement on a whim. I never go over there, and I noticed all this water. And long story short, one of our downspouts was leaking and it was forcing water into the walls and into the house. And when they came and they removed all of that, it was like, oh, okay, we've got a mold situation back there.
Yes.
But I couldn't believe. Then I started making the connection that you know how sick it was making me.
Yes. It's a real thing. And, you know, anybody that doubts it, you know, I mean, I can tell you that I've not only seen it with my son, went through it myself, but have seen it with thousands of clients and have heard this story so many times. But let's just take a look at a couple things. Like, magic mushrooms, right? It's a fungus. What happens if you take magic mushrooms? It's going to have a mental effect on you. Some good, some bad, right? I'm not recommending it whatsoever. I'm just saying that it's a thing. How about alcohol? What is that? It's yeast fermentation. If you take too much of it, you're literally drinking like a mycotoxin. A lot of money that goes along with it. Some people like it. Some people, they feel bad afterwards. But mentally, it can take them in a different place. Or how about LSD? I mean, I'm talking about drugs, but LSD comes from ergot, which is a rye mold and a mycotoxin. So that can make you trip and sometimes bad. Or penicillin, right? Some people it can help them, some people it can do something bad. But if you take all of those examples, what are you getting from the examples? It can have a mental and physical impact on you. So if you have these environmental triggers that are releasing these toxins into your environment, absolutely, it can have an impact on you. And most of them are bad, so it's important to find out, So one of the things that I didn't really touch upon is that there are some economical routes. Like, yes, you can do your own air sampling. MyMoldDetective.com. You can get air samples and you can get 5 of them, 5 cassettes, 6 cassettes. Do the samples, do the petri dishes. You can get a bunch of them, hit it on different levels and just see kind of what's going on. And you can start crossing it off the list. But if it's showing up, then hey, you're going to probably need to call in a professional, or you can just go straight to calling in a professional and make sure that the professional knows, listen, even if you do the remediation, I'm only going to have your company do the inspection, but I want the inspection to be thorough. So please, I want to sample every room. I want you to look into every room. I want you to check every place where there's moisture, HVAC included. The HVAC is a huge source of mold because of the condensation that occurs from the coils and the amount of moisture that gets into the system. So really have them do a thorough walkthrough. If you do have a mold sniffing dog in your area, that could be a really great route to find out, hey, is there anything here? But yes.
I've never heard of that. I never knew that there were dogs that could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, there's a couple of things that I want to provide to your listeners that are free resources. One, I recently wrote a book called Mold Free Living: How to Prevent Mold in a Humid Climate, and they can download that at moldebook.com. Okay, super simple. You just go in there, put in your name, where you heard about us, the podcast, and your email address, and you get the book. And it's 15 action tips on how to prevent mold in your home. And there's a lot of knowledge there from going through 3,500 homes in Tampa Bay. So even if you're not in a humid climate, there's a lot of pointers in there that are really, really valuable. The other one is there's a Facebook group. I'm not an admin of it, but I'm part of it. And it is Mold and Toxins, Healing Your Home and Body, I believe is the name of it. Right. But it's a fantastic resource. There's a lot of people on there. It's growing quickly. But the person that runs it, her name is Kendra. I have not met her, but I can tell you that there's not that many of us that have done the training that she's done. And I'm pulling it up right now. So it's called Mold and Toxins, Healing Your Home and Body. It's got 25,000 members right now. And it has a tremendous amount of information and resources that, you can basically have access to.
Okay. Now, just so I can recap, just so that I understand,
Sure,
and of course the
absolutely.
listeners.
Of course.
I think what I asked you, should we just go and just test off willy-nilly? And I think your response is, unless you're having some symptoms or there's some signs, you wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Is that fair?
I would say that that's fair, yeah. Because
Okay.
look, you can always do it just as a precautionary measure, but just know you're going to drop a couple $100 when you do that, and that's
Right.
okay. Look, you're paying for peace of mind, and there's a value to peace of mind, But at the same
Right.
time, you may be paying for a false peace of mind, which is almost worse because you just paid good money for a bad result. So you know, is there reason to believe that there may be an issue? Are you dealing with chronic, situations that might be triggered by an environmental aspect to it? Because it could be bacterial, it could be mold, there might be something else happening, but you've gone to doctors and they're not really pinpointing it and they're not giving you any solid answers, similar to with my son, right? Like he was having an asthma attack, he was having a hard time breathing. Well, it we had reason to believe that maybe the environment might be causing it, and we were spot on about that. So also, have there been, is there past history of water intrusion issues, and now we're not feeling great? I was just at a buddy of mine's house, and he didn't even realize it, but he's been waking up with congestion and itchy eyes, and he wasn't even putting two and two together. He just happened to
Yes.
pull his fridge out, and there was a bunch of mold behind the fridge. Now, somebody else might have said, "Oh, well, you need to tear out this entire wall." But the mold was in midway on the wall, and it was not black. And really, what was happening is the refrigerator was getting cold, the wall was getting cold, so there was enough moisture. It's like putting ice cubes into a glass, and there was moisture on that wall, and now there's mold growing on it. Well, then you look in the HVAC, and it's contaminated. So the contaminated HVAC is blowing spores into that area where there's moisture, and now there's mold on the wall. But guess what? It doesn't require doing a whole tear out reconstruction project. It's a matter of, we're going to clean that up for him. But when we go to clean it up, what's going to happen? It's going to aerosolize, and it's going to defend itself. It's going to release the mycotoxins. So that would not be enough. So we're going to clean the ducts. We're going to remove the mold, clean it up, wipe it down, and then we're going to do a whole home sanitization for him to address the air quality, all while under negative air, and making sure that we are not making the problem worse. So, but at least he doesn't have to go through the pain of building it all back afterwards.
Okay, so you don't have to tear down any part of his wall. It
No.
sounds that's good.
Right. So, but it's also important to have somebody that's going to look out for you and go, look, this is what you do need to do, and this is what you don't need to do. And this is how we can handle it without doing a whole reconstruction project on your kitchen.
Okay. Yeah, that gives that. It's not even my kitchen, and I feel like
yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon. Is there anything you wanted to discuss that I didn't ask you about?
I just appreciate the fact that you're bringing awareness to this topic. Your indoor air quality is such an important aspect of the life that you live. So when you really look at it, if your food is contaminated, or your water is contaminated, or your air is contaminated, there's no way that any of those things are at a poor quality and that you are able to live your best quality of life, right? There's just those, you have to have clean food, clean water, clean air. And the fact that you're bringing awareness to this topic, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and that's the whole goal of this podcast, is to bring awareness, because, a lot of times if it's not on your radar, you're not going to think about it. And mold sometimes is not on everybody's radar, and it can make you very sick.
That's a fact.
So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can
Thank
always
you, Brandon.
find us at moldsolutions.com, or on Instagram at mold.solutions. They can send us a message, and we definitely like responding to, the people that are seeking information.
Yep. And so, listeners, it will all be in the show notes. If you want to reach out to Brandon, please check the show notes. Thank you, Brandon,
Absolutely.
for joining me.
Yeah, you got it.